changes made social media just a little bit more addicting because you could go back to see who liked the post, and it meant that things could go viral. And then the most important change is in 2010 to 2012 when smartphones are widely adopted, including with young people. So think back to your first phone. How many of you got it between 2010 and 2012? You guys remember that? Getting your very first smartphone? Okay. I remember my first smartphone. It was a BlackBerry. I got it in 2012. I was so excited. That was also the year that I got an iPad. I got it as a graduation gift, and this is important because this is when technology becomes really portable. We can take it everywhere, including with kids. So it's kind of infused throughout society. So now this technology it's been here for about 15 years, and we know kind of some of the impact it's having on different societal outcomes. And so before I get to that part, I want to share this video with Tristan Harris about kind of what he kind of sums up what the change is in our digital world.
If something is a tool, it genuinely is just sitting there, waiting patiently. If something is not a tool, it's demanding things from you. It's seducing you, it's manipulating you, it wants things from you. We've moved away from having a tools-based technology environment to an addiction and manipulation-based technology environment.
Okay. Yeah, so he sums it up really nicely about the change from tools to manipulation. So what's happened since we've had this wide use of smartphones and social media everywhere? Well, the first thing that happened is that academic achievement across the globe has dipped. So I want to kind of bring your attention over here to the years on the bottom. So we see like from 2000 to about 2010, scores are stable. So this is a test that's taken throughout the world. It's called the PISA test. So this is a bunch of countries' data aggregated together. So we can see scores are about stable up until about this 2010, and they just start declining. They keep going down. They go down even more after the pandemic, but the trend definitely started before that. So as a school psychologist, this isn't surprising to me at all. I could see when I worked in the schools how distracting it was for kids to have their devices with them all the time. But it goes a little deeper than this. So, go to the next slide. So, veteran teachers, the teachers have been in the field like 20, 30 years, they say like something's happening with kids, like kids' brains are changing. We now have data to back this up. So these are some brain scan studies, and I want to draw your attention to the second study. So we're showing that studies are showing that for really heavy screen users, they're actually showing differences in their brain. And so this second study found that kids who use screen for over 7 hours showed premature thinning of the brain's cortex. That early cortical thinning, that's what happens with dementia patients. So this is really concerning that we're seeing these patterns in young kids. This first study talks about kind of similar changes in the brain for kids that were checking social media a lot. So I don't want you to panic if your kid has had a lot of screen time. This is really more for the heaviest users. And I know during the pandemic that was, the reality for a lot of us. There's a lot that we can do. I'm going to talk about that in the second half of the presentation, but definitely a trend I think we want to be aware of as parents. This is reflected in other data. So book reading is going way down. Professors, even at elite colleges, are saying that some kids come to their freshman year in college having read no books or very few books. And not everyone who's successful is a reader. Not all readers are necessarily successful, but this is a proxy for the idea that as a society, our attention span is diminishing. And it's particularly true for young people. So I want you to think about anything important that you've ever done in your life. Raising children, marriage, a degree, a job. What do they all have in common? They all require sustained focus and attention for a period of time. I want to share this quote from Naumann Elementary, author of Still in Focus. He says, "As a species, we're facing a slew of unprecedented tripwires and trapdoors, and unlike previous generations, we're mostly not rising to solve our biggest challenges. Why? I think part of the reason is that when attention breaks down, problem solving breaks down. Solving big problems requires the sustained focus of many people over many years. Democracy requires the ability of a population to pay attention long enough to identify real problems, distinguish them from fantasies, come up with solutions, and hold their leaders accountable if they fail to deliver them. If we lose that, we lose our ability to have a fully functioning society. I don't think it's a coincidence that this crisis in paying attention has taken place at the same time as the worst crisis of democracy since the 1930s. And I'm not talking about like political, like who's in charge now or who used to be in charge. I'm just talking about how we're struggling so much with polarization. No one can even agree on what the problems are, much less how to solve them. This is something that, we want to prepare our kids for. So we talked a little bit about academic achievement and focus. I want to talk about mental health as well. So here's a graph showing major depressive episodes amongst teenagers ages 12 to 17. So we kind of see the orange one is, can everyone see this okay? Might be kind of small back. So the orange line is girls, the blue line is boys. Girls always tend to have higher rates of anxiety and depression than boys. But we see that in the early 2000s, things are kind of flat for both of them, even though girls are higher. And then right around this period, this 2010, 2012, rates just skyrocket, particularly for girls. This is a really troubling trend. In 2023, the CDC did their biannual youth risk survey, and they now found that most teen girls, so over 50% of teen girls, are experiencing persistent sadness or hopelessness. So this was at 36% in 2011, and then by 2023 it went up to 57%, over half. Some people, when they see that first slide, they think, well, sure, rates of depression and maybe anxiety are going up, but that's a good thing because we have more access to information, and so kids, there's less stigma around mental health, maybe more people are seeking mental health services, and that's why we see this increase in depression. Unfortunately, not only are we seeing this just in what kids are reporting, but we're seeing this in terms of their behavior. So here's another graph. This is for emergency room visits for self-harm for kids ages 10 to 14. So we see, again, similar trend. Everything's kind of flat and stable up until about 2011, and then it just skyrockets. For girls, it goes up by a factor of 5. So this means that since 2011, 5 times the amount of 4th to 9th grade girls are going to the emergency room because there's a serious concern about their mental health. So, the question is, well, why? Why are we seeing these trends in mental health? What is it about phones and social media that's influencing these changes in mental health? One theory is that it just has to do with sleep. So digital devices are definitely causing a sleep crisis for kids. This is a graph showing kids that slept for less than 7 hours a night. This is 12th graders. So our elementary kids need about 10 hours of sleep. There's some individual differences there, but that's the average. High schoolers still need about 9 hours of sleep. So if you're getting less than 7 hours a night, that's a huge problem. So same trend. They go up a little bit here, like in the early 2000s. Maybe that's when the internet became popular, but then they get really bad again around 2012. Another theory for kind of why kind of digital devices, social media might maybe impacting kids' mental health is kind of its change on social relationships. I don't know if y'all can see this, a little bit hard to see, but basically these are graphs about, this one is social isolation, so here's the years down here, so we see a similar trend that right around the time that smartphones become widely adopted, social isolation goes way up. This one is friend social engagement, it goes way down. This one is like the most fascinating to me. This is household family social engagement. So this is how much social engagement you're getting even with people who live in your same house. So we're spending less time with each other even when we live together. And I am going to talk a little bit about, I think this has major implications for just parental screen time, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So here's some additional evidence that particularly social media use and mental health are linked. So we talked a little bit about sleep, but the idea that all this time that kids are spending digitally is an experience blocker for other things that are associated with robust mental health, like time outside, time with friends, nature, learning new things. Having adversity and challenge, turns out that we need some challenge. We need things to be somewhat difficult in order to develop robust mental health. We don't want there to be trauma. We don't want things to be extraordinarily difficult, but we want some challenges there. There's this really interesting study done by what happened to college campuses when Facebook was introduced. So when Facebook first came out, it was only available at certain college campuses. So I remember it coming out my sophomore year in college, and all you could do was put like a few pictures in like your status update. And I would always have like, Katie Hartman is studying and eating a burrito, and super important stuff. So then it started rolling out to different college campuses, not all at once. And so they were able to see, once Facebook was introduced to a college campus, what happened to mental health. And predictably, it went down. As soon as Facebook was introduced, mental health started declining. And that was like the old Facebook. Can you imagine what it would be like today? Meta's own internal research, they find that social media is bad for kids, particularly for girls. They don't do anything about it, but they know it. And then experimental studies find that well-designed studies, so typically find that when you reduce time on social media, your mental health improves. The study has to be long enough to kind of get over the withdrawal effects, because if you're a daily social media user and you stop using it, at first you'll feel a little bit worse, you'll go through a little bit of a withdrawal. But longer studies do show improvements. And I do want to acknowledge here that some of this research there's some debate amongst researchers about what role social media plays on mental health. If you want to kind of really dive into that, you can Google. You can read a little bit more about it yourself, but I think to way oversimplify the debate, a lot of this evidence is correlational, right? We know that correlation does not necessarily equal causation. But the only way we can know for sure to what extent smartphones and social media are impacting kids' mental health, we'd have to take a big group of kids, randomly assign half of them to have phones and use them all the time, randomly assign other kids to not have phones and follow them for like 20 years. And for obvious reasons, we're not going to be able to do that study, so we have to kind of use imperfect information and move forward there. And then, so I talked a little bit about academic achievement, focus, sleep, mental health. The last thing that is important to know is just that there's so many risks, kind of what the first video alluded to, risks that kids face online. So kids are contacted by strangers all the time, particularly on social media apps, but any app that has any sort of chat feature, kids are vulnerable to this. Sextortion. So let me talk a little bit about what sextortion is. So sextortion is when a kid, usually a young person, is on typically a social media app, and someone contacts them. So if it's a boy, usually it's like a pretty girl, and says, "Oh, I know your friend Johnny, like I go to the next middle school or whatever," and they start chatting and flirting, and then at some point they convince the young person to share a photo or a video, and then, something illicit, and then after that time they kind of reveal, okay, I'm not who I said I was, I'm a scammer, or they don't say I'm a scammer, but you need to give me $1,000 or I'm gonna share this video or this photo with all of your family and friends. And this is just devastating, and this doesn't happen, well, in extreme cases, kids have taken their own life because they're so worried about their information being shared. And this happens a lot. So Snapchat alone receives more than 10,000 reports of sextortion in a month. That's not in 1 year, that's in 1 month. And it's probably higher than that because not everyone wants to report this because it's pretty humiliating. Roblox is being sued for sexual exploitation. So the big issue, well, there's a lot of issues with Roblox, but one of the concerns is just the chat feature. So I think if your child is using any sort of online video game, it's really important to make sure the chat feature is turned off, because that's where the majority of problems are happening, that predators are contacting kids through the chat feature. There's also so I think there's kind of some debate here. Some people say, you have good parental controls, you have the chat feature turned off, it's safe to play. Other people say, no, the content within the app is still pretty gnarly. There was an article that just came out like this week about Roblox. Let me see if I can find the title. Okay, this is the title, so if you want to look it up more, you can yourself. It was My Chilling Week on Roblox, Sexually Assaulted and Shat On as a Child Avatar Roaming the Online World. So this is someone who basically set up their profile as if they were a child and just played Roblox for a week, and they kind of talked about what that was like. So I invite you to check that out. And then pornography. So very easily accessible. A lot of the pornography content available is graphic and violent. They're kind of using the same algorithm that social media does. So they show increasingly graphic and descriptive content in order to hook users. And even the best parental controls can't completely block pornography, even though you should use them. And I'm going to talk about parental controls in the second half. According to Common Sense Media, 15% of kids access pornography on a school-issued Chromebook. So even when there are, when it's one person's entire job to make the internet safe for kids, kids are still finding loopholes. So, yes. So let's talk about tablets and video games, especially because this is an elementary school crowd. So research on video games, this is really kind of mixed. So there are some studies that show cognitive benefits for video games, but then there's also a group of kids, about 1 in 10, that develop really what they call problematic use, which is really kind of a video game addiction. And so this is, characterized by constantly needing to play the game, cravings, withdrawal, and in a lot of cases, these kids need to go to some sort of rehabilitation in order to get support with their video game use. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the second half about kind of recommendations, but I think it's something to be aware of that for a casual user, so someone who may just play once a week with their buddies, it's probably fine. But for kids who can't stop playing, who are playing for hours, who have trouble engaging with the real world after they've played a video game, they might be falling into more of that problematic user category, and you may have to act a little differently as a parent. Another thing I want to talk about with video games is this concept of kind of the hero's journey. So boys are more interested in video games than girls. I think social media is the bigger problem for girls. And I know not all kids fit neatly into a gender binary, and not all kids fit this trend, but overall on average, boys kind of have this need to be a warrior, to be a hero, to be strong. Like my son, whenever I go on a walk with him, if he finds a stick, he has to pick it up, and it's a sword, and he has to fight off bad guys. And I used to do therapy with kids outside, and like 90% of my boy clients would do the same thing. They find a stick, they had to be fighting somebody. Video games really kind of offered this, what boys are craving in this area, but they kind of lack some of the embodied feeling that we would ideally like boys to have. So something I recommend for my clients with boys, especially boys that need kind of this action and rough and tumble play, is roughhousing. So not at school, but at home, roughhousing, scouts, martial arts, sports, and free play. And then tablets, talking about those briefly, you really want to think about what their impact is on free play and the need to use parental controls, because they basically serve as a phone. They kind of have the same capability. Okay, so that's a lot of information. It's very daunting. Now I want to talk in the second half about some different ideas and solutions. So I got many of these from this book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. It's a really great book. It's a pretty fast read, so I highly recommend this. And she kind of has this laid out the same way I do, that there's like 10 different rules. You might pick one of them, you might pick all of them. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is kind of our role as a parent, being a sturdy leader. So we can think of parenting on kind of two dimensions. One is our warmth and responsiveness, and then the other is expectations and control. So a parent who is low on warmth and low on boundaries, they would be considered kind of an uninvolved or neglectful parent. There's probably none of those parents in this today, because these parents don't tend to come to these type of meetings. Those type of parents are usually struggling with something, addiction, mental health problems. It's not necessarily their fault. And then parents who are high on warmth and responsiveness, who are really loving towards their children, really engaged with their children, but don't have a lot of rules, those are considered permissive. The parents who have a lot of rules, but not a lot of warmth, which is like my way or the highway, their kids typically fear them, but they don't necessarily respect and love them. The parenting style that's associated with the best outcome for kids are parents who have high warmth and responsiveness and a high amount of boundaries and control. This was, when I worked in a school, it was really interesting. These teachers, the teachers who had really good boundaries but were also really warm with the kids, they were always the most popular. I worked with kids who were really struggling academically, so I thought they might like kind of the permissive teachers, like the easy A. But no, when I would ask them, like, who would you go to if you had a problem, they always picked these authoritative teachers who had a lot of rules, they had a lot of structure, but they also were really warm to their kids. And so, and I'm not by any means saying that like I do this perfectly as a parent, this is hard, but this does guide me as a mom when I think about it's my role to set the rules and protect my kids and do what needs to be done. And it gives me some comfort knowing that, yeah, my kids might push back, but long term, this isn't gonna damage our relationship, right? I think that this is a lot of the challenge around tech for parents is like, if I take away their tablet, if I don't allow them to have a smartphone, are they gonna hate me? Is this gonna destroy our relationship? And I think what this research would suggest is that, no, that doesn't have to be the case. Okay, so second rule is thinking about having device-free zones in your home. The biggest one is no devices in the bedroom. So we talked about sleep earlier. Having a device in your bedroom is definitely going to interfere with your sleep. You as adults should do this too. So if your kid's using a phone or a device for an alarm clock, buy a separate alarm clock that has batteries in it. This alone, even if you do nothing else, if you just take all devices out of the bedroom, this is going to give you a huge bang for your buck and really help your kids sleep, which in turn is going to help their academics, their mental health, their physical health, all kinds of things. And then we can also think about like, what are other times that we want to be device free? So dinner table would be a good one. Riding around in the car might be a good one. That's the time when a lot of kids will share a lot with their parents. And another way of thinking about this is that technology is something maybe that you do in a public area of the house. So maybe we just don't use technology at all in our bedrooms with the door closed where kids are more likely to get in trouble. Maybe you have a family computer that's in the living room or the kitchen with a big screen that's facing out so you can kind of get a sense of what your kids are doing. That's another way of thinking about that. And then, yeah, delaying smartphones and building community. Melissa brought her tin can. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Why?
Yeah.
Sure. Within your article that we posted and shared in the Insider and in our comms, there is a solution for like delaying smartphones, but still giving children the opportunity to be able to call in a safe and controlled way. It's not just anybody, it's not another telemarketer phone number that they're reaching out to. And so it's literally bringing back the old phones like we had in our house, but it is connected through this additional piece right here, where as a parent, you can set permissions and say these are the only phone numbers you are allowed to call in, these are the only phone numbers that are allowed to call in. You can actually turn on or off the ability to call 911, so if you have a child who is in kindergarten and might want to explore a little bit more or play with it, you can turn that off. And then additionally, you can set parameters on like, I don't want phone calls after 9 p.m. and it's not allowed to be used, or before 8 a.m. So it was in the article, you're welcome to look at it, but you can also connect with other people. That's the name, like Tin Can, the old school, like where you would talk with your neighbor. It could be just that you have a group of friends. And so actually our little community, I want to say 5 or so of the homes have all ordered that. The pink families, the ones that want the pink phones, are still waiting on their order. I got mine first. But definitely a new way of like kind of bringing back maybe what we grew up with and that safety. And you can't go too far because it is literally connected. So that.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
So I think a landline would be a great first phone for an elementary kid. And then when you're thinking about getting your child a cellular phone, I really encourage you, and there's a guide on the handouts to consider a basic talk text phone before you move into like full-on like iPhone or Android that has access to social media and apps and the internet. For reasons that I just talked about. There's also this movement called Wait Till 8. So if you feel compelled to do this, if you want to delay giving your child a smartphone, you can still give them like a basic phone that can just talk and text. There's like the Bark phone, the Gab phone, there's flip phones. There's a lot of available options. But there's this pledge called Wait Till 8, and this is basically something you can sign that you are planning on delaying your child's first smartphone until the end of 8th grade. You can wait longer. It doesn't mean that you are promising to give your kid a phone at the end of 8th grade, but that's the And if 10 students from your child's grade sign it, then the pledge goes live and that information is shared with everyone in your, or that your information is shared with each other. So that would mean that if my daughter says, you know, wow, everyone has a smartphone, I'm the only one, I can say, well, that's not true. You know, Candace doesn't have a phone, or Melissa doesn't have a smartphone. So you have some sort of solidarity and support, and if nothing else, you can get your kids together and they can talk about how cool their parents are. So I think this would be something to champion amongst, if it speaks to you, you know, champion amongst your kids' friends, your class, and get other people on the same page. And I think this could really change kind of the landscape for preteens and teens. So I think about like middle school. Part of the challenge that I hear from other families is that, well, everyone's on Snapchat, everyone's on Instagram, and so I need to be on this so that I can talk to my friends. And I think if we got, you know, a third of kids that didn't have a smartphone, this would kind of change, and then students would have to find a different way to communicate. And then delaying social media till really age 16 or later is important for what I talked about previously. So this is something, if you are happy with your child's screen time, you don't need to pay attention to this, but if you feel like you've gotten off track with screens, you feel like your child's doing too much, or if there's any sort of just like behavior problem and you think screens might be related but you're not sure, this is something that I've done with families in private practice with really outstanding results. So what this is that you do a 30-day screen reset. You do it with everyone in the family. So maybe there's one of your children who you think is struggling more with screens. Don't just single them out and do it with only them. That'll make them feel really bad. But everyone is going to get rid of devices for 30 days. This includes like iPads, gaming consoles, smartphones. As an adult, you can't get rid of necessarily your smartphone or your computer, but you're going to set some boundaries with yourself. So maybe you're going to delete social media for 30 days, or you're only going to use your phone after your kids have gone to bed. Something that shows that you're in solidarity with them. And then you plan, especially in the beginning, some really fun family activities so that you're spending a lot of quality time together. Your kids are going to be, if you do this, your kids are going to be really mad at you. They're going to be so upset that you're doing this. And I highly recommend you check out the full book if you are going to do it, because it does take some planning. But I wanted to talk about it today because I've had clients come in with like a whole list of concerns, something that would normally take like a year or two of therapy. We do the screen reset and like the list goes down by 75%. Like a lot of problems just completely disappear. We don't even need to work on them in therapy because we've seen so much improvement with the screen reset. And if you are, if you're skeptical about this, I would try it on yourself. We talked a little bit about how kids are spending less time even in the same family with the adults that they live with. And this could be really interesting just to understand how screens impact your own brain. And so basically what you do is you take the screens away for 30 days, you observe progress, and then at the end of 30 days, you can reintroduce screens if you want to. So for some kids, they can handle like, for kids who do have problematic screen use, they can handle maybe a little bit of gaming like on the weekend after they've had some time to run around and be outside, but it's like too much on a weekday after school or something like that. So this is a really scientific way to kind of approach, to understand for your child how much screen time is the right amount. You also want to be careful if you do this. Don't promise your kids like after 30 days we're going to go back to the way things were before, because you may not want to do that. You may not be able to do that. It's kind of like an elimination diet. So if you were to get rid of dairy for 30 days and then have dairy and throw up, then dairy is probably not for you. So same thing with your kids. If you get rid of screens and their meltdowns way reduce, and then you give them screen after 30 days and they have a tantrum on that day, that kind of tells you, ooh, like this is really not jiving with my kid's brain. Okay, so I said take what you like and leave the rest, but this is something that I don't think any of us can skip. We have to be talking to our children about technology. I kind of have some talking points up here, but I want to highlight a couple that I think are the most important. So I think the most important is number 9, that we have to tell our kids, if you run into trouble on the internet, I want you to come to me. You will not be in trouble. I will not be mad. I will be very happy that you came and found me. When we look at some of these sextortion cases where there's really tragic outcomes, kids felt like they had no option. They felt alone. So I think this is really, really important to emphasize to kids that there isn't anything we can't overcome together. I'm here for you. And then, the other one I really wanna highlight is, well, I wanna highlight all of them, Tech Talk Tuesdays. So we wanna have like some basic guidelines around technology, that's kind of points 1 through 7. But then, beyond that, ideally, we're just talking about technology a lot and having it be a back and forth conversation. We don't want all of our conversations with technology around kids to be like parents coming down and saying, oh, this is what you shouldn't be doing, or kids these days are on their phone all the time. So, how many of you do like highs and lows around the dinner table? Does anyone ever do that? Yeah. So this is something similar. So on Tuesdays, when you do your highs and lows, you have it be about technology. So one way that technology helped you this week, one way in which technology was challenging this week, and that way you're having frequent conversations about technology that are a balance of positive and negative. So then, let me talk about some of these other things that are important to hit on. Never sending a nude picture, that one's really speaks for itself. Don't post anything online that you wouldn't want announced on a loudspeaker at school. Good to let kids know that a lot of parents read all of their kids' texts, that anything you write down is no longer private. People can screenshot it, they can post it on socials, and it will go viral. So encourage kids to think really carefully about what they write down. Only talk to people you know in real life, even if someone's pretending like they know you. People aren't what they say they are online. Think twice before you post anything mean and then don't do it. So if you're upset with someone, that's the time to put the phone down, take some time to cool off, and then revisit when you're feeling a little calmer. Tell your kids if they're curious about anything related to bodies, puberty, or sex, to either ask you first before they search for it, or you can look it up together. Another way to do this, it would be to like get a book that fits your family's values about sex and just kind of leave it laying around. They make books designed specifically for kids that are safe, because a lot of kids stumble across inappropriate content just because they search for something innocent. This one's interesting too. So your time and attention are valuable. When they've looked at studies about what influences kids to not smoke, they used to have these ads that showed like a black lung and was just like, don't do it, don't smoke. Turns out those aren't very effective at all in terms of changing attitudes. But what is effective, it's this, okay. What is effective is when they would talk to kids about tobacco executives and how they were making tons of money off getting kids hooked on their toxic product. That actually did influence, large groups of kids to not start smoking or to stop smoking. And so I think we can use that same kind of thinking around technology, talking about how all these tech bro billionaires are making all this money off of all of our attention, and they're not doing anything to really benefit society. They know they're harming kids and they're not doing anything about it. That can really fire up young people to feel like you're kind of sticking it to an authority figure. And then, so pornography. The average kid views their first pornography at age 13 now. So that means that half of the kids are seeing pornography for the first time before age 13. So that's why the recommendation is by age 10, you want to have talked about this. I have a book here if anyone wants to look at it. This is for like really small kids. You can just talk about like how you share with your kids that no one should be touching their private parts or looking at their private parts. You can also say, well, you shouldn't be seeing private parts on a screen. And if you do find that, tell me. I'm not going to be mad at you. You might find it accidentally, but talk to mom or dad so we can help you understand what you saw. And then with older kids, it's important to talk to them about what pornography is, that if they stumble across it again, you're not going to be mad, but you want them to be able to talk to you about it. And with like older kids, like middle school, high school kids, you can say something like, just like the Fast and the Furious movies don't teach you anything about what it's like to drive a car through Cedar Park, pornography doesn't teach you anything about what sex is like in real life. And watching a lot of it can kind of ruin your future relationships. So, as something that unfortunately we all need to talk to our kids about. So being mindful of your own device use and co-viewing. Having TV on in the background is associated with worse outcomes for kids. If you're doing that, I would phase it out. High levels of parental screen time are associated with worse psychosocial outcomes. This one, I really relate to this. I think part of the reason why I'm so interested in this topic is because I struggle so much to set boundaries with myself around technology. It's really, really easy to be distracted. And interestingly, I did like a little screen reset with myself, back in like February or March, and I noticed a lot of positive benefits. But the biggest change I noticed was in my kids' behavior. My kids' behavior was so much better, and I didn't touch their screen time, I was only working on my screen time. And I think it was just because I was more plugged in and noticed more of what they were doing. One of the things I tell most of my clients with kids when they first come in is, when you're with your children, once an hour, I want you to make one positive descriptive comment to your kids. Something more than just good job. So something like, oh, look at your outfit. I love how you put those colors together. You have such a good sense of style. And 100% of the time when families do that, they come back the next week and they're like, oh, that makes such a difference. My kid's behavior is so much better. I think that there's a lot that we're missing when we're on our devices all the time. And we don't think about that when we think of screen time. We think about how much our kids are spending on screens. And so I think any small improvement in this area can really help kids. And then kind of positive use of screen time, so co-viewing, watching a family movie together, watching a TV show together, watching sports together, that's associated typically with positive outcomes. So do your family movie nights, watch sports together, that's social, you're engaged with each other, and I wouldn't worry about that at all in terms of negative effects for kids, as long as the content's appropriate, obviously. Okay, parental controls. I've got a couple of different options here. With parental controls, you really want to think about layering this. Remember that statistic about 15% of kids viewing pornography on a Chromebook? It's really easy to get around parental controls, so you want to have this in multiple layers. So the first parental control I kind of like to think of like the good old-fashioned control is if your child wants an app, download it and use it for 7 days and have the profile set up for the age of your child. So if your daughter wants Snapchat, set up a Snapchat account with the age of your daughter and see if you get a ton of penis pictures in the first week, which you will probably get. And then you'll know that that's not a good app for your kid. Using your router, I have a link on the handout of a guide to routers. It's a lot of information, probably too much to get into today, but with your router, you can block content, you can set devices, you can set controls for specific devices. So that's one way to block certain content. And then you want to think about setting controls at the router level and also at the device level because kids get around parental controls really easily. Have everything shut down other than like making a phone call overnight because sleep is so important. Kids use their devices at night pretty easily. And then consider getting a third-party software. I hear particularly for iPhone that the iPhone parental controls are easier to get around. So here are some options. I hear really good things about Custodio, so that might be one to check out. Alrighty, so that brings us to the end. I just kind of want to open up